Today we're going to talk about why Guardant Health stock fell around 30%. And if you don't know what Guardant does, they're building a cancer blood test, and here's why that's significant. So someday in the future, you're going to go in your bathroom and take a piss in the morning into your smart toilet, and it's going to figure out what's wrong with you. We'll relay that information to your smart fridge, which will make a smoothie that will cure whatever ails you. So in the future, the ability to screen for problematic conditions will become seamless. Now, until then, we're going to have to take baby steps, and one of those is this idea that you go into the doctor, you get a blood test, and they look for all different types of cancers. Why is this important? Well, a lot of people run around raising money for the cure for cancer when, in fact, the cure, perhaps at least the low-hanging fruit, would be to identify cancer early. And here you can see survival rates for 5 years based by cancer type and whether or not the cancer is caught early, what's referred to here as localized, or if it's in late stage metastatic. So you can see that by catching cancer early, we can prevent bad things from happening. And one of those bad things happened to this poor woman here. No matter what you might think of her, certainly she had a very unfortunate event when her husband died at the age of 42 of colon cancer, and several years after that, she went on television and did a live colonoscopy on the Today Show, and that resulted in a lot of people going out and getting screening, so many that they named it the Katie Couric effect, and they actually did a study here that you can read on the effectiveness of having a celebrity such as Ms. Couric, especially with her story, promoting a particular test, and now she's working with a firm called Exact Sciences that has a stool test, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So they recently had an event where the population that's recommended to be tested by the powers that be fell from age 50 to age 45, and they were talking about how that's going to represent another 43 million tests. Well, we always like to do back of the napkin math, and it seems more like it's going to be around 20 million people. So they're also not going to be tested every year. The recommended guidance is a test every 3 years. So at a $500 price point, if we assume that, and we assume, let's say, a 50% penetration of that population, that would give us a $1.66 billion recurring revenue stream, almost as a software as a service, or software as a service, as you might say. And that adds to $5.5 billion that they had before, according to their estimates of the total addressable population. And they're bringing in $1.3 billion now. And you may wonder why we're talking about Exact Sciences. That's because we're leading up to the conversation we'll have about Guardant. It's important to know that Exact actually rose around 20% when Guardant fell 30%. So these companies are quite related, and this story is quite related. Now, we can do a quick check on those numbers. This is a great slide that Guardant put out, which shows the screening opportunity. You notice that they put their Shield, that's the brand name of their test, they put that near unscreened individuals, and in their call, they were kind of being probed as to how they thought their tests might compete with Exact, and we'll show you a slide later that talks a little bit about that. But you could see here at 2.8 million tests annually, multiply that by 500, and it's $1.4 billion. Not that far off from what they're actually doing, so the numbers add up. Now, the information, there's a press release that Guardant issued, and you can read it yourselves, and the two key talking points were around these numbers: 83% sensitivity compared to what Medicare requires, which is a greater than 74%, and then also specificity of 90%, which is equal to what Medicare requires. So perhaps that was a concern, though it wasn't raised in the call. We had initially thought that would have been a concern. I've put this table on the right here so that you can see, and take a moment, pause the video if you'd like, and really understand the distinction between these two. I've studied statistics extensively, and I still get confused as the difference between the two. So you can read that and see what those mean. And then they also released some information about 8,000 individuals and how 90% had completed the test versus a smaller number for Cologuard. And the message was very optimistic that they were going to pursue FDA approval in early 2023. And I pulled the prices of these stocks. You can see they settled down quite a bit towards the closing session today. So that's still fairly dramatic. So we'll talk about why that might be. But first, I wanted to point out here some additional metrics that are interesting when it comes to how their blood test will compete with Cologuard's stool test for colorectal cancer. And you can see here they say, well, patients say that they wouldn't choose to use Cologuard again, or that the blood test is preferred almost 5 times over a stool test, perhaps, right? This is all based on information that they're producing themselves. But what I wanted to focus on for the remainder of this conversation is around these two numbers. This 83% CRC, that stands for colorectal cancer sensitivity. That means the ability for it to detect people with colorectal cancer. And this AA detection, that stands for advanced adenoma, and we don't need to really know much about that. I'll talk about that in a second. Now, we listened to the analyst call, and it was quite the hoot. So while the company was describing this as a momentous occasion, everybody on that call, aside from one analyst who sounded really smashed and said they should get a Nobel Prize, everybody was disappointed. And the immediate questions that started coming out were around the sensitivity of 83% versus what the company had been, you can say, telegraphing in earlier results that they were providing, kind of setting expectations in the high 80s to low 90s. Again, this is what analysts are saying, and that they were very disappointed about that sensitivity number, whilst the company speculated that perhaps the 13% might be a bigger factor for the drop. So the point that they made was that above 76 or 77% on CRC sensitivity, they're going to get approved with that. They're in the right domain. So whether it's 83, 84, or 85, he said same zip code, doesn't matter. That seems to make sense. He also commented, this is the Guardant fella, commented on the 68 to 79% sensitivity of this procolon test, which is the only blood-based biomarker test for colorectal cancer that was improved in 2016. Another analyst brought up the impact of the results on test pricing. Management didn't think this would affect that variable. And then this AA, the advanced adenoma, these are just, you can think of them as tumors, I suppose. Only about 5% of these ever become cancer, and it takes about 10 years to mature into the big C. And the individual on the call on the company side that was commenting around that was trying to make the point that he didn't think those were going to be that relevant going forward, though we read some literature otherwise, and that's probably a different discussion. But the point is that it's all about how you market these tests, and there's an interesting site from some folks in some medical professionals, I believe it's in Austin, that have an article that says something about it's not good to use Cologuard, or beware of Cologuard screening, and they make the case here that the best way to get tested is always going to be a colonoscopy because it's able to identify polyps, and that's the best way to prevent colon cancer. And perhaps a lot of those people that are following what Katie Couric tells them to do aren't really that into the details of the tests that they're taking. And that you can see here, they say a large majority of polyps go undetected with Cologuard tests. Now, as a conclusion, remember these analysts on the call, they're all pretty sharp. Listen to the call. There's a link. I'll put the research piece that we did that accompanies this. I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. And in that, we've linked to this call. It's quite good. It's an hour long, but these analysts, they run complex spreadsheets that value these businesses, and they'll use all kinds of variables as inputs, and they'll run sensitivity analysis on them. And they're certainly using these numbers and probably putting more credibility into them than they should. And I think it seems like there was an overreaction, and perhaps as we get to the end of the trading session, it becomes more obvious that it was an overreaction. I think Guardant was down 40% at one point. But FDA approval is everything as a next step, and we're assured by the company that's on track. So that seems just fine, and it comes down really to marketing. And I think the use of Exact Sciences and having Katie Couric help promote Cologuard is certainly something that lends credibility to that. So go ahead and click the blue Nanalyze icon here on the right, and I'll go ahead and put another interesting video that you might like to watch here on the left. Thank you very much for your time.